1,500 Bigfoot sightings in the past 100 years in every state and parts of Canada. Myra Lopez,
The people who take Bigfoot research seriously don't take every alleged piece of footage seriously. In fact, they're often the first to call foul on the fakers. So when the host of one of the most watched Bigfoot expedition shows on television tells a podcast audience that his drone team captured something he has never been allowed to release on the network, you pay attention. What started as a routine thermal sweep over a remote ridgeline in Kentucky turned into the most discussed piece of unreleased cryptid footage in years. The man who watched the live feed has been a professional outdoorsman for 2 decades. He runs an expedition company. He is paid to be skeptical. And what he saw on that thermal monitor on the second night of a 4-night shoot is the reason he says, on the record, that he has stopped sleeping with his bedroom window open. Let's follow the footage into the Appalachian dark and find out what was really up on that ridge. The thing the drone wasn't supposed to film. The man is named Bryce Johnson. He is 48 years old. Outdoor adventurer, conservationist, founder of an expedition company based in the southeastern United States. He has hosted a long-running cryptid investigation series on a major cable network for several seasons. His on-camera persona is practiced, calm, and in his own words deliberately skeptical. It was on the second night of a recent shoot that his life would forever change. As the production team's generators hummed and shadows danced across the equipment trucks at the bottom of the mountain, Bryce felt a faint prickle of unease. At first it was nothing, just the natural creaks and groans of a Kentucky forest settling into the night. But then something caught his attention. The wind stopped. The frogs stopped. The owls stopped. The kind of silence that doesn't exist in nature unless something is making it happen on purpose. Then his drone pilot, sitting under the canopy with the thermal monitor on his lap, said one sentence very quietly into the comms. "Bryce, you need to come look at this." Bryce walked over. He sat down on a folding chair next to the monitor. He looked at the screen. And then, according to a description he gave on a podcast interview earlier this year, he sat there for almost a full minute without saying anything at all. The drone was hovering at 400 feet over a small clearing on the ridge above their base camp. The thermal camera was set to detect heat signatures down to 0.5 degrees Fahrenheit. The clearing was empty when the pilot first banked the drone over it. Then, in the upper left corner of the monitor, a thermal signature stepped out of the trees. It was the size of a man. But the proportions were wrong. The shoulders were too wide. The arms were too long. The wrists hung lower than the hip joint, well past where a human's wrists would hang. The head sat low between the shoulders, with no visible neck. And the heat signature was pulsing in a pattern Bryce had never seen on the monitor before, a slow, rhythmic warming and cooling across the chest cavity. As if the figure were drawing very deep breaths and holding each one for several seconds before releasing it. The figure was not moving. It was standing in the center of the clearing. It was looking straight up at the drone. Bryce told the pilot to pull the drone higher. The pilot increased altitude slowly. The figure on the monitor tracked the drone with its head. Bryce told the pilot to move the drone laterally. The pilot moved the drone 20 feet east. The figure rotated. Bryce told the pilot to cut the drone's running lights. The pilot cut the lights. The figure on the thermal monitor, which had no way to see the drone in visible spectrum because there was no visible spectrum too, See, kept tracking the drone exactly. It was tracking the drone by sound. It was hearing a small electric quadcopter at 400 feet. Bryce didn't say anything to the rest of the production team for the next 20 seconds. He just watched the figure watch the drone. His drone pilot, a former military operator with 3 deployments, said later that he had never seen Bryce go that quiet on a shoot. Then the figure did something they have never released on television. It raised one arm, slowly, pointed at the drone, and then, and this is the part Bryce has said out loud in 3 separate interviews now, without ever showing the actual footage. The thermal signature on the monitor began to fade. Not move. Fade. The shoulders went first, then the chest, then the arms. Within roughly 4 seconds, the entire heat signature on the monitor had dropped from a vivid white-hot outline to a barely visible smudge against the cool background of the clearing. The figure had not walked away. The figure had not crouched. The figure was still standing exactly where it had been standing. It had simply stopped giving off heat that the camera could detect. The pilot pulled the drone back over base camp without being asked. Bryce looked at him. The pilot looked back at Bryce. Neither of them said anything to the rest of the crew. They went and reviewed the footage in the production trailer 2 hours later, after wrap. They watched it 3 times. They sat there for almost 10 minutes after the 3rd viewing without speaking. The next morning, the production team found something in the leaf litter at the base of the ridge. 15 feet from where the camp's perimeter cameras were mounted, in soft mud beside a small stream, there were footprints. 5-toed, 16.5 inches long, pressed deep enough into the ground that whatever made them weighed at least 450 pounds. The prints didn't lead anywhere. They started in the middle of the stream bank. They ended at the edge of the camp's perimeter, exactly 20 feet from where Bryce had been sitting in his folding chair the night before. There was something else. On a flat slab of sandstone 6 feet from the prints, somebody had stacked 4 small stones in a vertical column. The stones were dry. The sandstone was wet with morning dew. The stones had been placed there after the dew had set, sometime between 3 and 5 in the morning. While Bryce was lying in his trailer 30 feet away, awake, listening to nothing. He left them where they were. The footage was not aired in the episode that resulted from the shoot. According to Bryce, the network legal team and the production company's executive producer made a joint decision not to include it in the final cut. The reasons given have varied across his interviews. In one version, the footage was too unverifiable for a nonfiction format. In another, the network wanted additional review before any release. In a third, Bryce said simply, "We were asked not to air it. We agreed not to air it. I won't say more than that." What he has said repeatedly is that the footage exists, that it is in the production company's archive, and that he has watched it more times than he wants to admit. He has also said, in a recent podcast appearance, the line that has become the title of half a dozen articles about him, "The drone caught something we were never meant to see," when asked what he meant by that, he declined to elaborate. He has said he is not afraid of being sued. He has said he is afraid of something else. The response to his comments has been immediate and explosive. Believers have hailed his account as the most credible piece of unreleased cryptid evidence in decades. Skeptics have dissected every word, searching for signs of self-promotion, exaggeration, or careful brand building. debates have raged across the cryptozoology community. Was this finally proof that the major cable networks were sitting on real evidence? The thermal signature fading to invisibility, the upward gaze, the deliberate hand point, all matched descriptions from previous unrelated sightings going back decades. Skeptics, however, weren't convinced. They pointed out that no footage had been released, that the entire account was based on Bryce's word, and that a man who hosts a Bigfoot show has obvious reasons to claim he has seen something incredible. To them, this was just another piece of careful brand building. But for those who believed, Bryce's account added to a growing body of evidence that something extraordinary lurks in the Appalachian forests, and that the public is not always allowed to see what the cameras find. Bryce's account wasn't an isolated incident. Tales of large humanoid figures appearing on thermal imaging have been reported across the eastern United States for decades, with the Appalachian Range standing out as a hot spot. From eerie vocalizations to massive footprints, hunters and researchers across the region have shared encounters that defy explanation. Among them is the story of a woman whose fascination began in childhood and led to a lifetime of strange experiences. Her name is Margaret Ann Ferreira. She is 64 years old. She has lived in a cabin near the Daniel Boone National Forest in eastern Kentucky for almost 40 years. Margaret's first brush with the unknown occurred in the early 1970s during a camping trip with her father in the Red River Gorge. Local hunters told stories of mysterious figures spotted at the edges of clearings after dark, figures that seemed to stand for hours and then vanish without a sound. Decades later, while clearing brush behind her cabin, she stumbled upon a massive footprint pressed deeply into the soft earth. The discovery reignited her belief in what her father had heard all those years ago. Over the years, Margaret encountered more. Snapped treetops 20 feet off the ground, the breaks too clean for any natural cause. Branches woven together into structures no animal could have made. And then came the strangest experience of her life. In the autumn of 2011, Margaret was sitting on her porch at dusk when she heard a voice call her name. Margaret. Once. Clear. From somewhere in the tree line, about 200 feet from the house. She got up to look. There was nobody there. She went back to her chair. A minute later, the voice called again. Margaret. From a completely different direction. Behind the house. There was nobody there either. She went inside, locked the door, and turned on every light in the cabin. The voice called a third time. From inside the wall. Not from inside the house. From inside the wall. She heard it through the wood paneling, low and slow, 3 feet from her ear. Margaret. The same voice. The same intonation. As if whatever was outside the house had not moved closer, but had somehow projected itself through the cabin structure to be heard from inches away. She slept in her car that night. The next morning, Margaret found something on her porch. 3 pine cones, stacked in a vertical column on the railing. The cones were dry. The railing was wet with frost. The cones had been placed there after the frost had set, sometime between 3 and 5 in the morning. While Margaret was lying in her car 20 feet away, awake, watching the cabin. She did not touch the cones. She drove into Lexington that afternoon and did not return for 6 weeks. Margaret's experience mirrors others. A man named Joseph Mendez described a terrifying encounter in the Pisgah National Forest of North Carolina in 2015. He was hiking with his girlfriend Alma and their German shepherd. They had stopped at a creek to refill water bottles when the dog, normally fearless, dropped flat to the ground and would not move. Mendez heard a series of low, structured vocalizations from the slope above the trail. As he turned to listen, a massive dark-haired creature stepped through a gap in the trees, dragging the carcass of a small deer. It saw them. It paused. It looked at the dog. Then it did something Mendez has never been able to explain. It set the carcass down on a fallen log. It straightened its back. It looked directly at his girlfriend Alma. And it raised one hand, palm out, the same gesture Bryce Johnson's drone would film on a Kentucky ridge 11 years later. It held that position for perhaps 3 seconds. Then it picked up the carcass and turned back into the forest and was gone. The encounter left Mendez's dog traumatized, a shadow of her once fearless self. She refused to walk near the trees for the rest of her life. Mendez and Alma broke up the following year. These accounts share common threads: the immense size of the creatures, the deliberate hand gesture, the profound fear they instill in those who witness them. Yet for every believer, there are skeptics ready to dismiss these stories as folklore, hallucination, or elaborate hoax. Until last year, the skeptics had a strong argument. Most thermal imaging encounters with unknown figures had been isolated incidents, not patterns. But over the past 3 years, a small group of researchers working with the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization has begun cataloging thermal anomalies from across the eastern United States. The mystery only deepened when one of those researchers, a former U.S. Forest Service biologist named Dr. Carol Iverson, published a preliminary analysis of 43 thermal videos collected between 2019 and 2025. The next chapter takes us to a research facility in West Virginia, where Dr. Iverson and her colleagues have been quietly examining what those thermal cameras are picking up. What they have found is going to change everything. The thing the drone wasn't supposed to film, and the pattern that connects 43 sightings across 8 states. The dataset wasn't built for Bigfoot. It was built for invasive species mapping. Dr. Iverson had spent 20 years using thermal imaging to track wild boar populations across the southern Appalachians. By 2022, she had access to a database of tens of thousands of hours of nighttime thermal footage, all originally collected for boar management studies. She had begun, almost as a side project, flagging the unusual heat signatures her cameras kept picking up. Signatures that didn't match boar. Signatures that didn't match bear, deer, coyote, or any other documented North American mammal. By 2025, she had 43 flagged events across an 8-state range. She decided to compare them. What she found should not have been possible. The first thing she did was check for what's called signature consistency. Every animal species produces a thermal signature with a recognizable shape, a profile of warmer and cooler areas across the body that varies by species but is statistically uniform within a species. Black bears have one shape. White-tailed deer have another. Humans have a third. The 43 flagged events did not match any of those profiles, but they matched each other. All 43 signatures showed the same body shape. Wide shoulders, long arms with the wrists hanging below the hip joint, low-set heads with no visible neck, pulsing chest cavities consistent with very deep, slow respiration. Whatever these heat signatures represented, they were all the same kind of thing. Then she did something the original wildlife biologists hadn't asked her to do. She analyzed the temperature regulation patterns. Warm-blooded mammals maintain a relatively stable core body temperature. The thermal signature might dim slightly when the animal is at rest, but it doesn't fluctuate in real time on the timescale of seconds. The 43 signatures did. In 26 of the events, the signature visibly cooled across the chest and shoulders within a span of 4 to 7 seconds, the same pattern Bryce Johnson and his drone pilot had described on the Kentucky Ridge. It was as though the figures could deliberately suppress their own heat output. Mammals are not supposed to be able to do that. Then the dataset did something Dr. Iverson hadn't expected. It began to show locations. The 43 events were not random. They clustered around specific geographic features: steep ridges, creek confluences, old-growth groves. And they clustered in time. Most of the events fell within the 2 weeks before and after the new moon, when the forest was at its darkest. The figures were appearing in the same kinds of places, at the same kinds of times, year after year. There are 6 findings Dr. Iverson has flagged in her preliminary report. I'll walk you through them in the order she ranked them, most certain to least. The first one, the most definitive. The signatures are not bears. Bears do not have wrists below the hip joint. Bears do not stand upright for the duration these figures stand upright. Bears do not display the same pulsing respiration pattern across the chest cavity. Whatever the cameras are seeing, it is not a bear. The second finding, the signatures are not human. The shoulder-to-hip ratio is wrong. The arm length is wrong. The respiratory rate is wrong. And in 12 of the 43 events, the figures were filmed at heights between 7 feet 4 inches and 8 feet 2 inches, heights that would correspond to one of the 8 tallest humans alive today. None of those humans were in the 8-state range during any of the recorded events. The third finding is the one Dr. Iverson asked her co-author to verify 3 separate times before she would sign off on the paper. The figures display deliberate hand gestures. Specifically, they raise one arm with the palm rotated outward and the fingers slightly spread, holding the gesture for 3 to 4 seconds before lowering it. The gesture appears in 17 of the 43 events. It appears in events from Maine to Georgia. It is identical, frame by frame, across thousands of miles in 7 separate years. It is the same gesture Joseph Mendez saw in 2015. It is the same gesture Bryce Johnson's drone filmed in Kentucky. The fourth finding, the figures track the cameras. In 11 of the events, the recording equipment was suspended from drones, balloons, or motion-activated tree mounts. In all 11 of those events, the figure on the thermal monitor moved its head, eyes, or whole body in ways that indicated awareness of the recording device, even when the device was silent, dark, and out of any reasonable human line of sight. They know they are being watched. They know what the cameras are. The fifth finding. I want you to think about this one for a second before I tell you what it is. In 19 of the 43 events, a smaller secondary signature appears within 30 feet of the larger one. Always, without exception, the smaller signature is consistent in shape with the larger one, but scaled down by roughly 40%. The smaller signature stays close to the larger one. The smaller signature is always partially shielded by the larger one, placed behind a tree, behind a boulder, behind the larger figure's own body. These are family groups. The figures the cameras are picking up are not solitary individuals. They are adults moving with juveniles. Whatever is being filmed, there are children with them. And the adults are positioning their bodies to keep the children out of the camera's direct line of sight. The sixth finding is the one Dr. Iverson has not released, and the one I will not speculate on. What I can tell you is this. In 4 of the 43 events, a third type of signature appears, larger than the adult-sized signatures, by a substantial margin. Dr. Iverson has not given the dimensions in any public document. She has said only that the signature falls outside the upper range of any known terrestrial primate. Whatever it is, Iverson's lab has not published a single image of it. The 4 events containing it are flagged in her dataset under a category she has labeled simply anomalous large. She does not discuss them. The story continues, but to understand what those thermal cameras have really been picking up, we need to go back further. Much further. Long before Bryce Johnson's drone hovered over a Kentucky ridge in the dark, the southern Appalachians had a reputation that was anything but ordinary. This stretch of mountains isn't just another beautiful range. Its history is steeped in stories of large figures in the trees, abandoned cabins, and unsettling silences unlike any other. The story begins in the 1780s. Early colonial trappers working the upper Cumberland River recorded encounters in their journals, described as the Silent Ones, and in one trapper's diary, Old Man of the Hollows. They were not Native Americans. The local Cherokee and Shawnee, when asked, said the Silent Ones were not their people. They lived above. They came down only at night. They were not to be looked at directly. In 1854, a survey party laying route through what is now Pike County, Kentucky, lost a man near the head of a remote creek. His name was Thomas Eddy. He walked out of camp at dusk to fetch water and never came back. The search party found his boot prints leading into a stand of poplar. The boot prints were joined, 15 feet in, by another set of tracks. 5-toed, 16 inches long, pressed deep enough into the ground that whatever made them weighed at least 400 pounds. The 2 sets of tracks continued for 200 feet. Then they stopped. Both sets. As if Eddy had simply been picked up and carried away. He was never found. In 1908, a coal mining outfit working a remote ridge in West Virginia abandoned the site after 14 weeks. The foreman wrote in his report that the men had refused to continue. They had been visited at night. Not by sounds. By a figure. The figure had stood at the edge of the firelight every evening for the final week of the operation, perfectly still, perfectly silent, watching them work. It had never advanced. It had never spoken. But on the final morning, the camp's 2 pack mules had been found dead at the edge of the clearing. Their necks had been broken. There were no tracks. In 1956, a forestry crew in eastern Tennessee reported the same phenomenon. 3 nights in a row, a figure stood at the edge of the firelight. On the 4th morning, a stack of 3 river stones was found on a stump in the middle of the camp. Stones the foreman swore had not been there the night before. Stones that had been piled with what he called care. The crew left that day. By 1972, locals across the southern Appalachians had quietly developed rules. Don't camp alone above the tree line. Don't keep your fire low after midnight. Don't look directly at the eyes if you see them in the trees. These weren't superstitions to the trappers and outfitters who passed them down. These were instructions for staying alive. Bryce Johnson didn't know any of this when his drone took off over that Kentucky ridge. He didn't know about the colonial trappers or the railway surveyor or the coal mining outfit. He didn't know about Thomas Eddy and the 2 sets of tracks that walked into the poplar and vanished. He thought he was on a television shoot. What he was actually doing was capturing the latest installment in a relationship that has been going on between the residents of those forests and the rest of us for at least 250 years. For decades after the early colonial encounters, the southern Appalachians fell into something like a quiet truce. Loggers stayed in established camps. Hunters stayed at lower elevations. The figures, when they appeared rarely. But the stories didn't end. In 1988, a backpacker on the Appalachian Trail in Virginia reported being followed for 3 nights by something walking parallel to the path on the slopes above. He never saw it. He just heard it, heavy, rhythmic, deliberate footsteps matching his own pace. On the 4th morning, he found a granite boulder placed in the center of the trail in front of his tent. The boulder weighed at least 300 pounds. There were no drag marks. He took a photograph and hiked out the same day. In 2001, a U.S. Forest Service helicopter pilot doing a wildfire survey over the Pisgah Ranger District reported seeing what he initially thought was a bear standing in a clearing below. He banked the helicopter for a closer pass. The figure did not run. It did not look at the helicopter. It walked slowly on 2 legs into the tree line. The pilot estimated its height at over 7 feet. He landed at the nearest fuel station and refused to fly that route again. He retired the following year. In 2018, a wildlife biologist working a black bear study in the Smokies captured a vocalization on one of his motion-activated audio traps. He didn't know what it was. He sent the file to a researcher in Washington State on a colleague's recommendation. The researcher ran it through transcription software and sent it back with a single line. This is the same vocalization signature as the 1972 Sierra sounds. This is a juvenile. In 2023, an emergency room nurse in Asheville, North Carolina, was treating an elderly hunter for hypothermia. The man had been brought in after going missing from his camp for 6 days. As the nurse was warming his hands, she mentioned that her brother had been hiking in the Cohutta wilderness the week before and had seen the strangest thing in a clearing. The old man's hand closed around her wrist so hard she dropped the thermometer. He looked her in the eye and asked, "Did your brother come back? Did he come back the same?" She didn't know what to say. He held her wrist for almost a minute. Then he let go, lay back on the pillow, closed his eyes, and would not speak to anyone for the rest of his stay in the hospital. He was discharged 3 days later. He gave a false address on the paperwork. The nurse has never seen him again. She has never forgotten his face. In the same week, Bryce Johnson's drone was hovering over that Kentucky ridge. A Forest Service ranger working a remote cabin in the same district reported finding what she described as a marker. 3 river stones, smooth and matched in size, arranged in a vertical column on the cabin's woodpile. There were no human visitors logged for that area in the previous month. There were no human boot prints in the leaf litter. There were, however, 4 prints in soft mud beside the cabin's water spigot. 5-toed, 16 inches long. She didn't tell anyone for 2 weeks. When Bryce Johnson's drone account began circulating online, she sent the photographs of her cabin to Dr. Iverson's lab without comment. The stones in her photograph match exactly the 4 stones the production crew found on the sandstone slab above their base camp. Whoever left those stones for the ranger left the markers for the production crew. Bryce Johnson has been asked in 3 separate interviews what he believes was on that thermal monitor. He has not given a definitive answer. What he has said is that he stopped describing the experience in skeptical terms after the second viewing. He has said the line that has now become inseparable from his name in the cryptid community. The drone caught something we were never meant to see. He said it the way a man finally gets a verdict on a question he has been carrying for years. Not relieved. Not vindicated. Tired. A man who had hoped, somewhere in the back of his head, that he would never actually find what he had been looking for in 20 years of expedition television. Some hoaxer in a costume. Some elaborate prank by a rival production company. Some way out. There isn't one. Even skeptics struggle to explain what's been recorded across Dr. Iverson's dataset. Many point to bears as a possible explanation, but the details don't quite add up. Bears don't have wrists below the hip joint. Bears don't display deliberate hand gestures. Bears don't suppress their own thermal signatures on cue. Others suggest the figures are humans in costumes, perhaps hoaxers staging encounters for the camera. But hoaxers don't show up on infrared with the wrong respiratory rate. They don't pulse heat across their chest cavities at the rate of a deep-breathing primate. And 43 independent hoaxers working across 8 states over 6 years would have to coordinate the same hand gesture, the same body proportions, the same family group positioning, frame by frame, to produce the dataset Dr. Iverson has assembled. The most common skeptical explanation today is that the entire phenomenon is the result of pareidolia and confirmation bias, that thermal cameras produce vague heat blobs and human brains construct meaning out of them. But Dr. Iverson's signatures are not blobs. They are detailed. They are consistent. They are reproduced across cameras, operators, and locations. And confirmation bias doesn't leave footprints. It doesn't twist pine needles into knots. It doesn't stack river stones on a Forest Service ranger's woodpile in the same week a drone catches something on a Kentucky ridge. Could something we don't understand be living in the deep folds of the southern Appalachians, in family groups, leaving deliberate markers for the people they have decided to be filmed by? Could they have been watching us, choosing us, allowing themselves to be caught on thermal imaging for at least the last 2.5 centuries? Tell us what you think in the comments. Like and subscribe for more.